Welcome to the Chief Strategy Officer Podcast. This podcast and Outthinker's Executive Peer Network provide a platform for the architects of corporate success, chief strategy officers, to collaborate and share their unique experiences in tackling complex challenges, navigating disruptive technologies, and driving impactful growth. In this episode, we sit down with Rachel Credidio, Chief Innovation Officer at Aster Group, to explore how restorative practices can be a powerful lever for culture change, innovation, and organizational performance. Having held the previous role of Chief Transformation Officer and People Officer, Rachel has been at the forefront of embedding inclusivity, trust, and accountability into the DNA of Aster Group. Her leadership has helped make the Aster Group one of the most impactful nonprofit groups in the UK, as they help tackle the UK's housing shortage by providing affordable, safe, and inclusive housing options at scale, while offering wraparound services to support vulnerable communities. In this episode, we cover why restorative practices reduce conflict and boost engagement across complex organizations, how inclusive culture lays the foundation for innovation and decentralized leadership, what it means to shift from managing people to empowering them through fair process and shared accountability, why building a culture of voice and trust is a strategic investment, not just a nice to have, how Rachel restructured policies and embedded principles into systems for long-term impact. Whether you're navigating transformation, scaling innovation, or building a more inclusive workforce, this episode offers practical tools and inspiration. Let's dive in with Rachel Credidio. Rachel, thank you so much for being here. It has been such a pleasure getting to know you over the last few months and learning your story, and we're thrilled to be able to have you here to unpack some of it with us. Where are you joining us from?
I am joining from Wiltshire in the UK, so just down the road from Stonehenge.
Ah, Stonehenge, where a lot began. Interesting. So we have so much to cover here, but I think it's important for us to understand a little bit more about the Aster Group and who you are and what you do. Because I think when most people who are not familiar with you, they underappreciate the scale of what you do and the people you serve.
Okay, thank you. Well, Aster Group is a not-for-dividend housing organisation, so we do make profits, but they all go back into the business to deliver the social purpose that we have, which is really all about providing lots of different housing options for tackling the housing shortage here in the UK. So it's a range of things, and primarily affordable housing. So we build about 1,000 homes a year, and we own 37,000 homes across the south of England, and our assets are worth about £2.4 billion, and that would be at the existing use value for the use that they have as affordable housing. So a whole range of things, and then all the other services that we provide to help those people that we house and the vulnerabilities that they might have. So we provide housing and repairs services, but also other support services as well for those people with vulnerabilities.
So how many people do you serve? How many employees do you employ?
So our employees are about 2,000, and the number of people that we serve, our customer base, will be well over 100,000. It will be, way in excess of that.
Great. Yeah, I think I needed our listeners to appreciate the scale of the impact that you have and the complexity by which you operate, which leads us to how important, I think, as organizations get larger and the diversity of services that you provide also mean that it's probably less process as a lever and more culture and organization become more important. How do we create a consistent delivery? We're going to be talking primarily today about restorative practices. And before we go into what restorative practices are, was there a moment, was there a time where you or people in the Aster Group realized that there was something that needed to be addressed?
So in my career, which spans sort of 20 years, I would say that actually my focus primarily has been on cultural initiatives as a sort of enabler to do all the things that we need to achieve as a business. So I think absolutely you're right. So much starts with culture. It was actually looking at the employee relations cases that we had as a business and thinking, my gosh, if you look through all of those cases of grievances and disciplinaries that we might have, They're often because there's been a misunderstanding or lack of communication and lack of people having their voice. But I would have to say that I've never, ever known anybody come out of one of those adversarial processes and think, oh my gosh, I'm glad I did that. That was really good. You would kind of think that with an adversarial process, there might be winners and losers. But in my experience, there's just losers and losers, because I don't think it really works for anybody. I think it's quite a painful and difficult process often for people. And really thinking, is there an alternative way where actually it's much more about understanding where people are coming from and not an adversarial process? Hopefully you can come to something where both people walk away and they're happy with the outcome rather than neither. So it was really looking, that was a primary driver in the first place, looking for an alternative to that.
How long into your experience at Aster did you realize there was this opportunity or need?
We became accredited in 2020, so that's how long our journey into being accredited. And we were the first UK organisation outside of the justice sector to be accredited as a restorative practice organisation. In my time where I actually took on people and culture as a responsibility, it was probably about 5 or 6 years after that. And we had done many different initiatives on inclusion and support around mental health, all kinds of things. But this was really quite a game changer. It did actually, as a result, halve our disciplinary and grievances when we introduced restorative practice. So it was very impactful. But I would say that was just really the start of that journey.
So tell us a little about what your motivations were. We haven't even gotten to the definition of restorative practices, where we'll get to in a moment. But people being happy and working together in harmony is certainly, there's value there. But the value of what you were pursuing didn't stop there. What were some of the other objectives, around innovation, around productivity, around impact, or things like that?
Yeah, so Aster's very, very much been really quite progressive in terms of working to a very inclusive culture. And it's very important part of Aster's identity. But it was very clear that you might really want inclusivity, and you can do lots of things to support that. And all the research shows that if you work on inclusivity, that actually you build diversity and you will have a more diverse workforce. And we know that that is very good, absolutely essential ingredient for innovation. And I think we can say, well, we want diversity of thought, we want inclusivity. But for me, sometimes I think, how are we giving people the tools to cope with that difference? So we're going to create a workforce where actually you really, really want difference of opinion and we want people to come at things from different angles. But what skills and what environment are we providing that help people to have really good conversations and not really difficult conversations in that space? And so for me, restorative practice was something that was a really good toolkit to have very good conversations which help inclusivity, which then really support your diversity, which are essential for your innovation journey. So for me, it was really, I guess, stepping stones in terms of getting where we need to be. I did a research piece on how could RP support inclusivity, and indeed does it. And there is so much research on the ingredients for inclusivity. And I would say there's such a read across to actually what restorative practice helps implement. So I was absolutely, utterly convinced about that. Mm-hmm. And I guess now for the organisation, it's about really, really upscaling that, because I think a lot of organisations have been through challenging times through COVID and other things, and the economic environment, which have meant that maybe they may become a little bit too internally focusing. And I think now, absolutely, organisations need to be in that innovation space and really thinking about the challenges that are ahead to be ready for tomorrow and 5 years' time. So if we're going to have to upscale energy around innovation, how do we make sure we do that in a really positive, helpful way with really good conversations and something that takes everybody with us?
Yeah, that's great, because this is not about compromise. It's not about us feeling good. It's about outcomes, right? Often it comes like, I did a little research here that in indigenous populations in New Zealand and Canada and Africa, my mom from Bangladesh, whenever there is an issue, they call together a family meeting and everyone sits around a circle and expresses themselves. And then we have, out of restorative justice, what I read is Howard Zehr, grandfather of restorative justice, and then Ted Wachtel, who is a founder of the International Institute of Restorative Practices. So this is around 1990s that this sort of gets formalized, although the roots are much deeper. Could you just give us a little bit on what restorative practices are?
Okay, so as you've already alluded to it, there's roots in many different cultures, but the restorative justice movement has really been around speaking to people who have had crimes perpetrated against them. And often what they say is, it's not about the punishment that's met out. What I want to make sure that that doesn't happen to somebody else again. And often that is what they're most interested in. They really, really want to make sure, how can the best scenario come out of this situation to make sure that other people don't go through what I've gone through? And that requires a much deeper level of understanding about what's happened than just, there's a crime and meting out a punishment. And so that really is the sort of ethos for me. And I think that is why it applies in so many other settings. It's been in schools and, lots of other organisations. I suppose for me, it was really a good communication toolkit. So there's slightly different interpretations of what it is and different names given to things. But the way we have worked with it is, the first thing is that it gives everybody a voice. So actually it's making sure that everyone's voice is heard. That really means that where you've also got sort of quite horizontal structure to leadership, it's really making sure that where you've got vertical, you're moving to a much more horizontal plane. So actually it doesn't really matter about hierarchy. Everyone's voice counts. So it's about understanding the impact of decisions and things on different individuals. So I think that is very, very important. The next point, so there's 4 aspects of restorative practice, is about fair process. So whatever you go through and whatever you're doing, people can not be so happy with the outcome, but actually they will feel a sense of justice if they feel that the process you've gone through is a fair process.
Yes.
So we have done things and adopted things like this very proactively through things like restructures and things like that, where we've had a discussion about what does a fair process look like that we can all agree to. So you might not be so happy with the outcome, but actually you'll feel far, far better if you feel you've had your voice and you've gone through a fair process. It's about accountability. So it's making sure that everyone is accountable for their own actions, and actually you are only having accountability where actually you want to step into that accountable space, because you can't force some accountability on somebody. It's something that they have to enter into. So it is understanding that personal accountability to step into that space. And I think ensuring that's where it's within your gift and your remit to actually do that. So it's being absolutely clear about what that looks like. And then the last one, so there's different styles where we can do things 2 people or 4 people, but it's making sure that whenever we do things, we're working together as adults in a very adult relationship, and it's working with people and not doing 2 or 4. So for me, they're all really, really good ingredients of a healthy sort of culture, really.
I want to get into what it looks like. Before I go there, just talk to us a little bit more about accountability, because I have a feeling that you have thought about what accountability is and is not and how it's established.
Yeah, so I think something I often hear is, well, I'm going to hold them accountable, or I'm going to make them accountable. And I think it's really interesting if you think about that, because it's almost like saying, well, I'm going to make somebody thankful, or, and actually you can't do that just because you've said,
make them love me.
Yeah. Accountability is something that by nature, the person has to own themselves and step into that space. And I think sometimes that requires a little bit more conversation about what that really means, about what part somebody is prepared to do, what they feel is within their gift and they're empowered to do. Because I think it's almost something that very much in culture today, we sort of almost think on a hierarchical basis, well, you've got to be accountable for that because it's your job or whatever. And we don't necessarily unpick it. And I think to have something that's really rooted on trust and where people really, really can act within the things that within their gift, I think it really, really needs a little bit more exploration, which is why I think accountability is so important.
Yeah, my father was a professor, and one of his 4 areas was social constructionism, which I hear a lot of that in what we're talking about here. He would say you can't have accountability without choice. And it also makes me think about in strategy when you're setting down your KPIs or you're managing people, right? There's like the top down, like you have to give me 33. But there's needs to be, in order for real accountability and maybe commitment to be there, there has to be the sense of choice of I'm signing up for this job, which brings me to like, what does it look like? I don't know if these are conversations that are had in an elevator before a meeting, if they are one-on-ones, if they are a formal meeting and with people sitting around a round table. Like, what is it like? Actually, I'm a visual person. What does it look like?
So on our sort of early journey, as I say, we really used it much more as a tool in employee relations to really try and avoid an adversarial process. So that would be very much more about qualified RP, a person coming in and acting as the facilitator to hold conversations and make sure that there were ground rules around how conversations were conducted. And it would be probably much more on a facilitator with potentially, 2 individuals that didn't see eye to eye in what you would probably previously see as a sort of kind of mediation role. But very, very quickly, through all the training and our work on RP, it was absolutely evident there's so many tools that you can use to actually really aid really good conversation. One of the most powerful that I've seen in action is actually the learning circle, where you have a topic and everyone is given a time, 3 minutes or whatever it is that you choose. Usually actually 3 minutes is quite good. Everyone has the same amount of time. Someone calls people out randomly in the circle, so you can't predict when you're going to come next. That's because actually, if you think you're going to be next, you spend time thinking about what you're going to say rather than listening. So it encourages active listening if you don't know when you're going to come in. And really, that is so powerful for diffusing a situation where everybody can make sure that their voice is heard. I held a very difficult process where people were going to have their final salary pension schemes taken away, which obviously is incredibly emotionally charged for people. But just giving people that space where you can say, well, you tell me what the impact is for you. What do you want to happen out of this process? You understand the reasoning and constraints, but, tell it from your perspective for 3 minutes. Just massively diffuses a situation. Really powerful seeing that in action. But, we started off where every individual who came into the organisation and our existing workforce would have a restorative practice taster. So everybody was at least understood restorative practice principles. And then some of us were trained to a level 2 training so that we're able to do the sort of facilitation and things.
And this training and these levels are from this Institute of Restorative Practices.
That's right, restorative practice. Yeah, so it's all accredited.
Yes.
And in actual fact, being a level 2 practitioner like myself means that actually you could go into the community and do restorative justice cases if you, it gives you that level of qualification. But it became really apparent that actually, and I think this is my greatest learning from the whole process and what we've gone through, is that it absolutely can be something you pick up and use when things have gone wrong and when conflicts arise. But actually that is so underutilizing its value. And the massive value is not seeing it as something you pick up when things go wrong, but actually adopting all those principles in what you do day in, day out. And so we now don't put people on restorative practice training. What we do is make it part of the induction. It's embedded into our code of conduct. We have a behavioural framework called the Aster Way. It's completely embedded in that. So it's actually, this is just the way we do things around here. And I think that is absolutely what I'd recommend to anybody looking at it. Don't pick it up to use it for conflict resolution.
Okay.
Just have it as part of your DNA.
Yeah, I think all great effective technologies, and this is a technology, eventually they just fade in the background and we don't see them anymore. For an organization that wants to get there, where do you suggest they start? Because I know that you have engineered quite significant change management efforts that have transformed things. And I'm sure that you think strategically about who early adopters are or what use case to use and what sequence. How did you decide where to start and what rollout looked like?
So I think that finding out more about it so that you can be personally understand the opportunities that it provides and what it is a really good starting point. So I think is it for an individual actually understanding more about it, because then you can see whether that seems like a good fit for your organisation and what the synergies and opportunities are. And I think the best way is always to think, how can I sell this to my own organisation? I would say the best thing is to start from the very, very top. We held sessions with the board who said, actually, if we adopt these principles, that could actually really, really change how we conduct board meetings. And there's some things that if you think them through, it could actually be quite impactful to the way you do things. So I think I would say find out how it could apply to your organisation, what the touch points are with the values, and then really start with selling it from the very top. Because with any cultural change, to have integrity, it needs to be absolutely something where you walk the talk and it's through the whole organisation.
Yes. So smart. Yeah. What actually matters to the organization that they will want to see the change or shift or outcome in. And I understand that that depends on the organization. But in the case of the Aster Group, what were some of those early wins that you were pursuing?
So some of the examples that we have are things like using it in our complaints service. So using learning circles to make sure that actually in an area where there might be blame, and actually one of the things that Restorative also really does is really help reinforce a no blame culture, but a learning culture and a learning process. And from things like complaints, you absolutely want that to happen. So embedding that into our process to ensure learning across the organisation. You know, as I've mentioned, using it on things like restructures. So at the moment, I have taken on a registered charity as part of my portfolio, and that's for people with a disability. And actually, you know, I say to myself, would there be any situation where you're working with people you want to make real impact and difference and innovate for the future? And if you're working with vulnerable people who have disabilities, surely you absolutely want to make sure there's fair process and that voice is heard. And so we've really challenged ourselves, well, how do we make sure that's done? And that stepped us into places like making sure that there's advocacy arrangements and things like that to really reinforce. So I suppose it sort of really centres you on what your outcomes are that you want to be able to demonstrate. And then it does actually impact the way that you do things.
It seems like you chose certain touch points. So you talked about the onboarding is an important touch point. A moment of disagreement or conflict or something is a natural touch point. I would think maybe like performance reviews is probably a touch point, or problem solving. Did I miss any other like important touch points?
Yes, so I think it's a really good checklist on anything you do, and it's become part of the conversation. So now it's like, well, do you think people will think that's fair process if we check that's fair process? Even in things like employee voice, it's a really good question to say, well, actually, do all those parts apply? And it's a really good challenge to say, often we say, oh, well, we just need to make a quick decision. We'll just tell people, oh, is that doing to, or is that working with? So it's just a really good checklist to hold each other to account, I guess, on the way in which we are doing things. So all these things, we have old habits that die hard, don't we? And I think, you know, we often have ways in which we work. So we need sometimes to have those ways in which we can, you know, challenge the status quo in the way we're doing things, because sometimes it's easier to slip back into, you know, being a bit too directive or whatever. But it's sort of thinking about what will the impact be? And how could I do this for the greatest positive impact?
What keeps coming up for me is just time. I could just tell you, Jane, I want you to just do this. Don't ask me any questions. I don't have time, right? Like time is so compressed. It's so precious. How were you able, or what advice you have for someone who faces, hey, look, I don't have time to check if we think it's a fair process. I don't have the time to listen to everyone and make sure they feel heard. How do you address that?
There are times to be directive. So, you know, if the house is burning down or the office is burning down, you're not going to make sure that you've consulted with everybody about the best choice of action. You just need to do whatever needs to do in the moment. So clearly there's a time and a place for being really directive. And sometimes for confidentiality and all kinds of things, clearly that is the case. But I would say that there is so much compelling evidence that having a really engaged workforce that you work with as a team just will provide you dividends in the long run. And I always say it's an investment. So, okay, yes, it does take time, and yes, it does take energy, and it takes resource, but I always say it's absolutely an investment on which I will tell you you will have a return. It's about scoping it and making sure everything's proportionate to whatever you have at the time. But I think it's just a good way to think about, how will this feel to people? How will it land? Will they feel that this is fair? At the end of the day, we're all human, and we come to work to bring our humanness, don't we? We want to be felt that we've been treated as an individual.
Yep. Did you have to change? The answer may be no. Any systems or structures in order to embody this permanently?
Yeah, so there was quite a few policies. So we had to look at things like our disciplinary procedure, grievance procedure. We did have an anti-bullying policy. Well, actually, in this kind of environment, you have to really think through, well, what does that mean? People will still do things which are really wrong, and there isn't time for a conversation about it. They just need to be told. But it really makes you think about what your approach to think those things are. So yeah, there was quite a bit of looking at those things and making sure that they really were culturally where you wanted them to be for the outcomes that you wanted to have. In terms of technology platforms and things like that, not particularly. I mean, once you start thinking it through in terms of even how you delegate, it makes you think about everything really, because it kind of follows that you think then about empowerment. Because if you've got accountability, right, actually you can empower people more, you can delegate more. So yeah, it kind of opens the door to lots of things, really.
Yeah, and I've been very interested in, and this is from work from Rita McGrath and Gary Hamel and others, about that. One of the scaling issues of an organization is that the control layer, the management layer, as you get bigger, it grows exponentially. And eventually, to be able to ensure proper behaviors, you fall under its weight of the management layer. And I see this as maybe a way to also push that management out, because we have accountability. We have choice of, I commit to this. I don't need like a heavy management layer to force compliance.
Yeah, it really moves you away from that sort of command and control mentality, and is very much about essentially an inclusive workforce where everyone has voice. And I think for lots of workforces, I think it's a really unsettling time for a lot of employees, because with the advent of AI and things like that, they really wonder, what's my place going to be? What's my role going to be? And I think having something that's very, very human, that appeals to our humanness and our ability to make good decisions, have voice about impact and things like that, which with the best will in the world, AI is not going to be able to do, definitely not for the foreseeable future. I think it's really important to get those things right.
Yeah. There's so many layers of positive impact, right? There's innovation. There are fewer, errors. There's greater engagement. There's probably greater employee loyalty. Can you just give us an example of something that you've seen or experienced that told you, yeah, this is working?
So we have professional practice meetings for those of us that are level 2 qualified to share how we're going, how it's worked in practice. And there are so many examples where people can talk about ways that it's worked in day-to-day life, going about their usual work, which I think absolutely reinforces this is absolutely working. So an example would be somebody in the development team who there's an issue between something that the contractors in the eyes of the customer has not done. They're not happy about the quality of service, and the contractor's really, really entrenched. And then there was a customer who was really, really unhappy. And to an extent, then Aster's kind of in the middle, trying to negotiate between the contractor and the customer. And it was really powerful to hear how they'd used restorative practice to just hear the impact from the customer. Well, what does this mean to you? What's the fair process that you want to happen? Really pulling that out. And then a facilitated meeting then between the different parties, which then found a way forward and resolved things. And when you hear things like that people are using it, applying it, I just say it's just about good communication. It's just tools for good communication. And when that works practically day to day, I just think, yes, that definitely is worth it.
How do you measure your success along the journey towards adopting and benefiting from RP?
So we have to go through an annual recreditation process on restorative practice to maintain our accreditation. But actually, this is about producing outcomes. And one of the things we want to do is really make sure that we're in an inclusive organisation. So we do the talent inclusion and diversity evaluation every year, which we have done since 2021. So it's called the TIDE evaluation. And we have seen a 26% increase in our scores since that first submission, which I would say is really tied to our work on restorative practice, which has now taken us to silver status. So I would say that that is absolute bottom line evidence that it really impacts where it matters.
That's great. For someone who's listening to this and thinks, yeah, we do need more psychological safety. We do need more accountability. We do need greater levels of innovation. We do need more engagement, all these things. Where would you suggest someone leading transformation or innovation or strategy, where would they start?
So there's information out there about different organisations, which will be different in different places, because I know that this does apply across the world. I think finding somebody who really lives and breathes that every day in their life is really a good place to start. There's nothing more powerful than the storytelling of people who can tell you the stories of how it's applied. And sometimes it is when there's real adversity, not necessarily conflict, but when really, really challenging things have happened to organisations. The stories of how organisations have picked themselves up from those things using restorative practice principles are really, really compelling. And it is really simple. But if you can just capture people enough to really think, yeah, this, culturally, they're all indicators of a really good culture. I think that, that is just so helpful. One of the things that has always stayed with me is we often think about being nice, and actually nice doesn't cut it with anything. There's no place for nice. But in restorative practice, there's a really good place for kind. It's some things like that they're just, nuggets that you can really take. And you can think, actually, when we do things as an organisation, do we actually want to, have things where we've done it in a way where people think, yeah, they thought about the impact and they did it in the way which was actually hearing my voice the best way to do that for me, even if it's things that people don't like. And we all have those things from time to time that we have to do.
Yeah. Empathy is such an important part of it. And empathy, you are the way you are, and that's okay. But empathy, that I think that comes with a commitment to an outcome, and the kind of outcomes that you're pursuing have huge consequences, right? In terms of, do people have a home, like that commitment to that? And it's not enough just to say, let's just compromise. It is, let me understand you as a human with points of views. You understand me as a human, and then our shared commitment. And it feels much more of a performance culture.
Absolutely. And I think that's really amazing when you have a purpose. And I feel incredibly lucky to have an organisation that has such amazing social purpose. But actually, whatever you do, you want to go to work to do your very best. And I believe that people go to work to be fulfilled and feel that they want to play the very best role that they can do. And actually, we need to help people to have a part in doing that, sharing their ideas and not being the quiet one that's not heard, and all those things. Very important.
I love it. I love how holistically thought through the methodology, and yet malleable and adaptable it is. And I do believe that organizations who are going to be future ready, we need to be more decentralized. We need to have a smaller management layer. We need to allow more empowerment. And this is an excellent technology, an organizational, psychological, human, just conversational technology to achieve that. Rachel, thank you so much for taking time to unpack this for us and giving us paths to follow to pursue this in our context. Thank you so much for being here with us, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Chief Strategy Officer podcast. Thank you to our guest, Rachel Credidio. Executive leaders who want to save time and resources or grow their network with like-minded peers can learn more about Outthinker's executive peer networks at outthinkernetwork.com. Until next time, let's keep the conversation going and rewrite the future of strategy together.